While everyone at the concert was happy, the twin girls in the front row were just holding each other and crying. Emma and Sarah's tears had escaped the notice of 25,000 people, but Elvis saw them, and the promise he made that night would save 2 orphaned children while creating one of the most touching moments in music history. It was a warm summer evening in 1975, and the massive Las Vegas venue was packed to capacity. Elvis Presley was in the middle of one of his most successful residencies, and tonight's show promised to be spectacular. The energy in the room was electric, as 25,000 fans filled every seat, their voices creating a thunderous roar of anticipation. But among all those excited faces, 2 small figures in the front row seemed completely out of place. 8-year-old twins Emma and Sarah Mitchell sat perfectly still, their small hands clasped tightly together, tears streaming silently down their identical faces. While everyone around them cheered and laughed, the 2 girls appeared to be drowning in an ocean of sorrow. Just 6 weeks earlier, Emma and Sarah's world had been completely different. They lived in suburban Memphis with their parents, Michael and Jennifer Mitchell. Michael was a music teacher, and Jennifer worked as a nurse. The family wasn't wealthy, but they were rich in love and laughter. The twins were inseparable, sharing everything from toys to dreams. Every evening after dinner, the family would gather around their old piano while Michael played Elvis songs. Emma would sing harmony while Sarah kept time, clapping her hands and dancing around the living room. "Girls," Michael would say with a smile, "one day we're going to see Elvis perform live. It's going to be magical." It was more than just a dream. It was a promise that bound them together. Michael had been saving money for months, putting aside whatever he could from his modest salary. He had already picked out front-row tickets for Elvis's upcoming Las Vegas residency, seats that had cost him nearly 3 months' worth of savings. The twins would spend hours practicing their favorite Elvis songs, preparing for the moment when they would finally see their hero perform. They had matching red dresses picked out and had even choreographed little dance moves to go with each song. But life has a cruel way of shattering dreams without warning. On a rainy Thursday evening in April, Michael and Jennifer were driving home from a parent-teacher conference when their car was struck by a drunk driver who ran a red light. The impact was devastating and instantaneous. Both parents were killed immediately. Emma and Sarah were at their neighbor's house when the police arrived. They had been playing in the backyard, completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had been watching them, broke the news as gently as she could. The twins didn't fully understand what "gone forever" meant. They kept asking when Mommy and Daddy were coming home, when they would sing Elvis songs together again, when they would go to the concert that Daddy had promised them. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and whispered condolences. Social workers appeared with clipboards, discussing foster care and adoption options as if the twins weren't sitting right there, listening to every word. Emma and Sarah's salvation came in the form of their father's sister, Margaret Mitchell Coleman. Margaret was a single woman in her 40s who had devoted her life to her career as a high school principal in Las Vegas. She had never married, never had children, and her small apartment was hardly suitable for 2 grieving 8-year-olds. But when she saw her brother's daughter sitting alone at the funeral, looking lost and terrified, Margaret knew what she had to do. Without hesitation, she began the legal process to gain custody of the twins. The transition was painful for everyone involved. Emma and Sarah moved to Las Vegas, leaving behind everything familiar. Margaret did her best to make them feel welcome, but the girls remained distant and withdrawn. They barely spoke, barely ate, and spent most of their time sitting together on the couch. The twins were trapped in their grief, unable to process the magnitude of their loss. They had nightmares every night and refused to listen to music, the sound of any song bringing back too many painful memories. 3 weeks after the twins moved in with her, Margaret discovered something that would change everything. Hidden in one of the girls' suitcases were the front row Elvis tickets that their father had purchased. The concert date was circled in red on a small calendar, with a note in Michael's handwriting. The big day, Emma and Sarah's first Elvis concert. Margaret Margaret's heart broke as she realized the significance of what she was holding. This wasn't just a concert ticket, it was the physical manifestation of a promise that would never be kept. But as she looked at those tickets, an idea began to form. The concert was still 2 weeks away. Maybe this could be a way to honor her brother's memory and help the girls begin to heal. That evening, Margaret sat down with Emma and Sarah and showed them the tickets. For the first time since their parents' death, she saw a spark of something in their eyes. Not quite hope, but perhaps the possibility of hope. "Your daddy wanted you to see Elvis," Margaret said gently. "He saved up for months to buy these tickets. What do you think? Should we go?" The twins looked at each other, communicating in that silent way that only they understood. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy said it would be magical." "Maybe," Sarah added quietly. "If we go, we'll feel close to them again." The decision wasn't easy. In the days leading up to the concert, Margaret helped the twins prepare. They practiced some of Elvis's songs, though the girls' voices were hesitant and sad. Margaret found their matching red dresses and had them cleaned and pressed. But as the concert date approached, the twins became increasingly anxious. They worried that going to the concert would somehow mean they were moving on, leaving their mother and father behind. The night of the concert arrived with all the fanfare Las Vegas was famous for. The venue was ablaze with lights, and crowds of excited fans streamed through the entrances. Margaret held the twins' hands tightly as they made their way through the crowd. Emma and Sarah wore their matching red dresses, just as their parents had planned, but instead of excitement, their faces showed only uncertainty and grief. As they found their seats in the front row, the twins looked around at the massive venue with wide, frightened eyes. Other concert-goers around them were laughing and taking pictures, sharing stories about previous Elvis shows. But Emma and Sarah sat in silence, holding hands and staring at the empty stage. "Are you okay?" Margaret whispered as the lights began to dim. Emma nodded, though tears were already forming. "We just miss them so much," she said. Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. "Daddy should be here with us," she whispered. The opening act took the stage to thunderous applause, but the twins barely noticed. They sat perfectly still, their hands clasped together, lost in their own world of sadness. While 25,000 people around them clapped and cheered, Emma and Sarah remained silent, their tears flowing freely now. Other people in the front row began to notice the crying children. Some looked concerned, others whispered among themselves, wondering what was wrong, but the twins' grief was so profound that it created a small island of sadness in an ocean of joy. Margaret put her arms around both girls, trying to offer comfort, but she could feel their pain as if it were her own. She began to wonder if bringing them here had been a mistake, but just as she was about to suggest they leave, the lights dimmed completely and a hush fell over the crowd. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. A single spotlight illuminated the stage, and there he was, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll himself, dressed in his iconic white jumpsuit that sparkled like stars under the stage lights. The crowd erupted into the loudest cheer. People jumped to their feet, screaming and applauding as Elvis walked to the center of the stage with that famous swagger and confidence that had made him a legend. "Thank you. Thank you very much," Elvis said into the microphone. "It's good to be back in Las Vegas, ladies and gentlemen." Elvis began his set with "That's All Right," and the entire venue became electric with energy. But for Emma and Sarah, each song was a reminder of what they had lost, each note a painful echo of their father's voice. Elvis Presley had performed for millions of people throughout his career. He had seen every kind of audience reaction imaginable. But as he moved across the stage during his third song, something caught his attention that made him pause mid-verse. In the front row, directly in his line of sight, sat two small girls who weren't cheering or singing along like everyone else. They were identical twins, wearing matching red dresses, and they were crying, not the happy tears of overwhelmed fans, but deep, heartbroken sobs. Elvis had always prided himself on his connection with his audience, but this was different. This wasn't about entertaining a crowd. This was about two small children who were clearly suffering. Without missing a beat, Elvis continued singing, but his eyes kept returning to the twins. He watched as an older woman tried to comfort them, but the children remained inconsolable. Something about the scene tugged at Elvis's heart in a way that few things ever had. Looking at Emma and Sarah, he saw something that resonated deeply with his own experiences of loss. As the song reached its final notes, Elvis made a decision that would change both his life and the twins' lives forever. In his entire career, Elvis Presley had never stopped a concert mid-performance to address individual audience members. But looking down at Emma and Sarah's tear-stained faces, Elvis felt something more powerful than professionalism. He felt compassion. The song ended, and instead of moving into his next number, Elvis set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. The crowd, sensing something unusual was happening, began to quiet down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the venue, "I need to take a moment here." The silence that followed was deafening. 25,000 people held their breath, wondering what was happening. Elvis pointed toward Emma and Sarah. "I see two beautiful young ladies down here in the front row who seem to be carrying some very heavy feelings tonight." All eyes turned to the twins, who looked up at Elvis through their tears, hardly believing that the king of rock and roll was talking about them. "Young ladies," Elvis said, speaking directly to Emma and Sarah now, "would you mind if I came down there to talk to you for a minute?" What happened next would be talked about for decades to come. Elvis Presley, in the middle of a sold-out Las Vegas show, stepped down from the stage and made his way to the front row where Emma and Sarah sat. The crowd was stunned into complete silence. People pulled out cameras, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elvis approached the twins with gentle steps, his rhinestone jumpsuit catching the stage lights. When he reached them, he knelt down so he was at their eye level, his famous face kind and deeply concerned. "What are your names, sweethearts?" Elvis asked softly. "Emma," one twin managed to whisper. "And I'm Sarah," the other added. "Emma and Sarah," Elvis repeated. "Those are beautiful names for two beautiful girls. Tell me, what's got you so sad tonight?" For a moment, neither twin could speak. Margaret leaned forward and whispered something in Elvis's ear, briefly explaining about the twins' parents, about the car accident, about the promise that had brought them here tonight. Elvis listened intently as Margaret briefly explained Emma and Sarah's story. His expression shifted from curiosity to understanding, to deep compassion as he learned about their parents' death and their struggle with grief. When Margaret finished speaking, Elvis nodded solemnly and turned back to the twins. The entire venue remained silent, hanging on every word. "Emma and Sarah," Elvis said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around the girls like a blanket. "I want you to know that your mama and daddy are here tonight. They're here in your hearts, in your memories, and in the love they gave you." The twins looked up at Elvis through their tears, searching his face for comfort. "You know," Elvis continued, "I lost my mama when I was young too. The people we love never really leave us. They live on in the music we share, in the stories we tell, and in the dreams we chase. Your daddy's dream was for you to hear this music. Don't you think he'd want you to smile tonight?" Slowly, both twins nodded. For the first time since their parents' death, they felt a tiny spark of hope. Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out two small white handkerchiefs. Gently, he wiped the tears from each girl's cheeks. "Now, Emma and Sarah," Elvis said with that famous smile, "I've got an idea. How would you like to help me with the next song?" The twins' eyes widened with surprise. "Us?" Emma whispered. "You," Elvis confirmed. "See, I was going to sing 'Love Me Tender,' but I have a feeling it would sound better with help from two special friends. What do you say?" The crowd began to murmur with excitement. Margaret nodded encouragingly, tears streaming down her face. "We don't know all the words," Sarah admitted quietly. Elvis chuckled. "Sweethearts, that song isn't about knowing all the words perfectly. It's about feeling the music in your heart. And I have a feeling your hearts know this song because your daddy taught it to you with love." The twins looked at each other, communicating in that silent twin way. Finally, Emma spoke for both of them. "Daddy used to sing that song to us every night before bed." "Then," Elvis said, standing and extending both hands to the girls, "let's sing it for him, and for your mama, too. Come on up on stage with me, and let's give your parents the concert they always wanted you to have." What followed was perhaps the most touching moment in the history of live performance. Emma and Sarah, their small hands dwarfed by Elvis's larger ones, walked onto the stage with the king of rock and roll. The crowd erupted in warm, appreciative applause. Elvis guided the twins to the center of the stage, where 3 microphones now stood waiting. He adjusted 2 of them to the girls' height and then addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis announced, "I'd like you to meet my new friends, Emma and Sarah Mitchell. Tonight, we're going to sing a song for their mama and daddy, who are watching from heaven." The crowd responded with gentle applause, and the twins felt something they hadn't experienced in weeks. They felt like they belonged somewhere. Elvis positioned himself between the 2 girls and nodded to his band. The familiar opening notes of "Love Me Tender" filled the venue, and Elvis began to sing, "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." At first, Emma and Sarah just listened, mesmerized. But as the song continued, Elvis gently encouraged them to join in. Their voices were small and uncertain at first, but Elvis smiled encouragingly, and gradually, their voices grew stronger. As the song progressed, something magical happened. The twins' voices, pure and sweet despite their recent sorrow, began to blend with Elvis's in a harmony that sent chills through the entire venue. It was as if their father's spirit was there with them, guiding their voices. Elvis adjusted his volume to complement their voices, creating a duet that was both professional and deeply personal. "Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill." As they sang together, Emma and Sarah felt something shift inside them. The crushing weight of grief began to lift, just slightly. They could almost hear their father's voice joining in, could almost feel their mother's presence beside them on that stage. The song reached its crescendo, and all 3 voices rose together in perfect harmony. As the final notes faded away, the silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, the applause began, building into a thunderous ovation that lasted several minutes. People were crying, laughing, and cheering all at once, moved by the pure emotion of what they had witnessed. Emma and Sarah stood on that stage, overwhelmed by a feeling of peace they hadn't experienced since their parents' death. For the first time in weeks, they weren't thinking about what they had lost. They were thinking about what they had gained. Elvis knelt down beside them again. "How do you feel, girls?" he asked. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "I feel like Mama and Daddy heard us," she said simply. Sarah nodded. "It felt like they were singing with us." Elvis's own eyes filled with tears. "I believe they were, sweethearts. I believe they were." Elvis stood to address the audience, then turned back to the twins with sudden inspiration. "Emma and Sarah," he said, "I want to make you a promise. From now on, whenever I perform Love Me Tender, I'm going to think of you and your parents. And I want you to promise me that you'll never forget that music has the power to keep love alive." The twins nodded solemnly. "But that's not all," Elvis continued, reaching into his pocket. "I want you to have these." Elvis pulled out 2 small silver necklaces, each bearing a lightning bolt pendant, his personal symbol. The crowd watched in respectful silence as he placed one around each twin's neck. "These are very special to me," Elvis explained. "Whenever you feel sad, whenever you miss your mama and daddy, I want you to hold these and remember tonight. Remember that love never dies and music never leaves us." Emma and Sarah clutched their necklaces tightly, looking up at Elvis with eyes that now shone with hope. "Will we see you again?" Emma asked. Elvis smiled. "Sweethearts, every time you hear music, every time you sing, every time you remember this night, you'll see me, and more importantly, you'll see your mama and daddy. Music makes us immortal. Don't ever forget that." The crowd erupted in another wave of applause as the twins took a bow with Elvis. Elvis invited the twins to stay on stage for the rest of the concert, and what followed was unlike any show he had ever performed. With Emma and Sarah by his side, every song took on new meaning. The twins didn't sing every song, but they stayed on stage, sometimes swaying to the music, sometimes just watching in wonder. During Hound Dog, they actually began to dance a little, bringing smiles throughout the venue. When Elvis performed Don't Be Cruel, he dedicated it to all the parents out there who love their children enough to leave them with beautiful memories. The crowd understood and responded with appreciative applause. As the concert ended, Elvis walked the twins back to Margaret. He knelt down one final time. Promise me you'll take care of each other, and promise me you'll never stop believing in the power of music to heal hearts." "We promise," both girls said in unison. As Elvis prepared to leave, Sarah suddenly ran back and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you for keeping Daddy's promise," she whispered. Elvis hugged her back. "Thank you for reminding me why I do what I do," he replied. That night changed everything for Emma and Sarah Mitchell. They returned home different children than the ones who had left earlier. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by hope, purpose, and connection to something larger than their pain. The twins kept Elvis's necklaces with them always, and whenever they felt alone, they would hold them and remember that magical night when music had healed their broken hearts. Years later, Emma and Sarah would both become music teachers, dedicating their lives to sharing the power of song with children who needed healing. They would often tell their students about the night Elvis Presley taught them that music doesn't just entertain, it connects, it heals, and it keeps our loved ones alive in our hearts forever. The concert that night lasted about 2.5 hours, but its impact would last a lifetime. For Emma, for Sarah, for Margaret, for Elvis himself, and for the 25,000 people who witnessed something extraordinary. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when compassion takes center stage and music becomes a bridge between grief and healing.